You're about to find out what the latest cruise news and updates mean for you as a cruiser, including some of the hiccups and drama around the startup of mainstream cruising in Germany, what's happening in the United States, and how you can have a major influence over what happens to the future of cruising, plus some news on some brand new regions opening up to mainstream cruising. This and much, much more coming up right now in this cruise update. One of the biggest cruise updates and news of the week was what happened when mainstream cruising started again in Germany. The Royal Caribbean owned Mein Schiff line started sailing again, and it's due to be quickly followed by AIDA from the Carnival Corporation and also Hapag-Lloyd, which is also owned by Royal Caribbean in a joint venture. However, things didn't go quite as smoothly as had been planned. First of all, one of the Mein Schiff ships had to cancel their sailing because they couldn't get crew back fast enough to reboard and basically get the ship up and running. This is going to be a challenge, I think, as we see cruising starting up again in greater numbers around the world, just getting crew back. However, there was a slightly more important and perhaps more dramatic incident when 10 of the crew that were brought back to start up the AIDA operations tested positive for COVID-19. On the plus side, what AIDA argued, and again, AIDA is owned by the Carnival Corporation, they pointed out that it did show the importance of their screening and how their screening is making sure that asymptomatic crew don't come on board. However, of course, it did, again, raise the whole question around the role of testing, particularly when bringing passengers on board, because passengers weren't being tested before boarding. They were just going through temperature screening. The second thing that we learned is, although cruise lovers are adamant that there is a huge demand for cruising, these cruises are not sailing full. First of all, because they have lower capacity as part of the agreement to start sailing. So they're actually only booking or making booking available for around 60% capacity. So the first Mein Schiff ship sailing could normally take 2,900 passengers. It was allowed to take 1,600. However, only 1,200 passengers actually booked the cruise. And I think this is a big learning. Although there is a lot of hype and belief that there's a huge, big pent-up demand for cruising, it is probably going to take a while as these ships start sailing. On the plus side, these ships are now sailing, and of course, learning can take place. What does it mean for you as a cruiser? Well, first of all, it probably means that as these cruises come back on stream after a long period of lockdown, everything is not going to go entirely smoothly, and that's to be expected as new protocols come in place. So you need to be a little bit flexible. Secondly, as cruising comes back on stream, don't panic about there being availability, because there is likely to be a reservation about going back cruising. So the die-hard cruisers are probably going to find, as these cruises come back on sale, they'll get an opportunity to sell. So don't panic too much about that. The second really big bunch of news is cruising is increasingly looking like a regional activity for domestic travel for local residents of a particular country. We're not seeing cruising opening up, which is traveling between multiple countries. So let's take a look at what's actually happening and was in the news to kind of reinforce that. First of all, another country in Europe has just this week announced that it's opening to mainstream ocean cruising, and that is Greece. Now, Greece did have a couple of small lines like Variety Cruises, which is a pretty small ship. I think they only hold, 40, 50 passengers. But they're now opening to mainstream ships, and they're allowing ships to sail around initially 6 key ports in Greece. And that includes the ports of Piraeus, which is Athens, Rhodes, Heraklion, Volos, Katakolon, and Corfu. And they do say that ultimately they will be opening to more. Very importantly, they are saying that cruises that sail around those ports need to follow the EU guidelines with their healthy gateways. And the EU guidelines, which are covered in another video, do include things like low capacity, restrictions on the amount of people that you have in any venues, temperature checks, screenings, all those kind of things. So you can watch that video if you want to find out more what those protocols are. The Greek cruises are going to be open to EU passengers. We're already seeing that happening across Europe and a couple of other places. So in Norway, you can go cruising initially only for Norwegian and Danish passengers. They're now, as the EU borders are open to more EU passengers. France is selling for French passengers initially around French ports. As I mentioned earlier on, Germany, you can now sail. You can also sail around Iceland if you're an EU resident. We're also seeing very active negotiations for round the UK cruises, with Hurtigruten hoping to start sailing in September. But we've also seen, for example, Princess Cruises has announced a really big push in 2021 in round the UK cruises, and they're selling them very aggressively at the moment to UK residents. And they already did a season every year of round UK, but they're really ramping that up for 2021. We've also seen other cruise lines talking about looking at that. So we're seeing more and more domestic cruises for residents of that particular country. So what's ironic about cruising is we're seeing that increasingly become a domestic rather than an international experience as cruising reopens. And all the news that's happening reinforces that. So for example, if we take a look at river cruising, what we're seeing in Europe is the river cruising lines that cater for either local residents or EU residents are the ones that have opened. So Cross Europe is sailing, Nico Cruises is sailing, Arosa is sailing. But what we're seeing is the river cruising lines that cater for a more international audience, so those that rely a lot on particularly American passengers, are holding back launching. So Scenic and Emerald and Avalon have all announced that they will not be cruising until November, which is really the end of the river cruising season actually. We're seeing other cruise lines like Amma Waterways, although they're only talking about sailing much later in the year, have started doing some charter cruises which are for German-speaking cruises only. So we're seeing more evidence as the news comes out that again cruising is catering for a very domestic audience. In the United States, you can of course go cruising very soon on the US rivers if you're a US resident. If you want to go ocean cruising in the United States, you can do that by going up to Alaska on Uncruise, where they have small ships so they don't fall within the CDC no sail rules. You do have to have a COVID-19 test before entering Alaska, but you could go cruising there. Again, it's a very domestic cruise for domestic passengers. In Asia, we're seeing cruises opening, for example, initially in Taiwan with Dream Cruises sailing for Taiwanese passengers around the Taiwanese islands, and that just started this week. But what we're seeing is those cruise lines that want to sail across multiple countries are not able to start up because of what's going on. And the news we're seeing is actually pushing that further and further back. So for example, Norwegian Cruise Lines announced that they're further cancelling right through now until November their cruises. Princess Cruises announced that they are cancelling all their cruises right through to the middle of December. Holland America, even into January, have cancelled now their world cruise, partly because they sold their ship that was going to do it, but they're not replacing that with another ship. Saga Cruises, for example, out of the UK, they have cancelled their big exotic voyage, which is going to head off around South America, which is due to go in January 2021. So those cruises that sail from country to country are not happening. And this is one of the big challenges if you're based in the United States, because under US law, any cruise ship sailing over a US port has to visit a foreign port before it can come back into the United States. So cruise lines in the US can't do, for example, a round parts of the US itineraries or head out to the Caribbean and back. So this is a big, big problem in terms of the way the cruising and the news that cruising is coming. So I think we're going to keep seeing in the United States, as we've seen this week, more and more cruise lines pushing cruising further back. This leads me to the third really big item of news and update, and this is related to the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, who have big concerns about cruising. I've done a separate video about what the CDC concerns. However, in the last couple of days, there's been a big step forward where you have an opportunity to influence the thinking of the CDC. They have started a consultation where they're asking views from the industry, from agents, from interested parties, and from passengers about how cruising should start up in and out of the United States. If you actually want to participate or find out more about the things that they're asking and consulting on, you can find a link for that in the description. And of course, it's now coming up on screen, the link for finding out more about that. What sort of things are they consulting on? They're consulting on everything from what the capacity on ships should be, the role of testing, both before boarding and on board for both passengers and crew. They're talking about controls. Should there be controls on excursions? Should there be controls on the type of entertainment, dining venues, capacity in venues, even right down to the length of cruises and all sorts of things around the whole protocols if there is an outbreak. So again, on the plus side, the CDC for the very first time has started to look forward to the opening of cruising. Another really important aspect about that consultation, though, is They're asking for submissions to be submitted to basically about a week to 10 days before the current no-sell order expires. So this is a strong indicator, of course, that the no-sell order is going to be extended, because there's no way they're going to be able to get all that input, all that consultation in, digest it, analyze it, and have a view within about a week. That just isn't going to happen. So I think there's a really strong indication, of course, that they're going to be pushing it out. However, if you want to have a say on how the United States starts up cruising again, have your say directly into the CDC. Although mainstream cruising with those mainstream cruise lines is pretty much suspended around the world, there is a lot of news and updates happening in the world of cruising. What we're seeing is domestic cruising is starting up for local residents. We're seeing, of course, inevitably various hiccups and starts and learnings as that starts up. But another big key update is we're starting to see finally the CDC looking at how can more mainstream cruising start up in the United States. Hope you found this update helpful. Every week I give you a brand new update with everything going on. If you have any questions, comments, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Always a good discussion in the comments as people comment and have their thoughts. So why don't you leave your comments and thoughts now? And of course, I have loads more videos of updates, advice, and tips. So why don't you watch another one of those right now?